Hello, my name is Tina Martin. I was about to start this painting of these bluebirds here and decided to go ahead and record this. Now I'm not going to do the whole painting. I just wanted to talk about color choices and how to make some neutrals that will make your brighter colors pop. As you can see, I made this background, okay, and this background pretty much resembles the photo here by a friend of mine and an old classmate of mine, Stacy. So what I wanted to do was get that background in first, and then normally I would do this part right now, but I'm wanting to start this area up here, and then I'll do the underpainting of underneath the birds here. But I just want to try to get this part flowing a little bit because I'm excited to get started on the colorful parts of it. So when I'm setting up my paint, there's two blues that I am utilizing. One is called Phthalo, and I like the Liquitex Basics. There are other brands out there, but for the cost, this is the brand that I use. But you can see how it's spelled, Phthalo, Phthalo Blue. And Phthalo Blue is a little bit brighter. So this is Phthalo Blue, and this is Phthalo Blue mixed with white. This blue over here is called Ultramarine blue, and it leans toward purple a little bit. So when you mix that color with white, it's a little bit grayer looking. So you can see this is the Phthalo with white, and that's the Ultramarine with white. Now I don't have any Ultramarine on my palette. I'm just not preparing my palette basically, and I wanted to share this with you because there's a lot of my friends out there are painting, and while we have painted together, some of us, I wanted to reiterate color mixing because it's really important that you get these neutrals next to your bright color so that everything is not bright. All right, so I got some ultramarine there. The other thing I want to talk about is the color Burnt Sienna. All right, Burnt Sienna is this color right here, and it is made by mixing blue and orange. So you can see on my palette here I have blue and orange, and then Burnt Sienna. And here's the trick with Burnt Sienna. You can control how dark your color is by adding more blue. So this right here, if you bought it in a store, we called Burnt Umber. I don't have any Burnt Umber, so I made it. You take the Burnt Sienna, add some blue to it, you got Burnt Umber. Now you can add either blue. I like the Ultramarine, but you can try and see what it looks like with the Phthalo as well. Just a little bit of a different dark brown. The Phthalo actually tends to get a little bit darker. I've used Phthalo and Burnt Umber as well. But for this, I wanted to use those colors as part of my backgrounds. I never use black. I always mix my blacks. Another black that I like to make is by mixing greens and purples. So mixing black is a little bit different than toning down a color. When you tone down a color, you use the complement. But when I make blacks, I like to use the Burnt Siennas and blues, or I like to use purple and green. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the bird, and that's going to come in handy because there are some really, really dark spots on this bird. So you can see there's some dark spots there. So I've got these really, really rich dark blacks, and I'm going to be mixing those colors when I get to that. But the other thing I want to point out is the variations in blue. Some of these blues almost look gray. All right, so these up here, so that's maybe a light blue, but this looks gray. In between, that bright blue right there at the top of the head is showing up because the areas around it have been neutralized. Neutralizing a color means to make it look a little grayish or a little brownish, and you use the complements, like I said, to do that. But here's a shortcut for me. Because we're using blues, this burnt sienna is a mixture of blue and orange already. So sometimes instead of grabbing orange and adding it to my blue to tone it down, I grab burnt sienna because it's a mixture of orange and blue. So I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna mix a couple of those gray blues for you so you can see. When you're mixing your colors, you always want to use a palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, instead of using the Brussels layer brush, always, what this happened? I painted it a couple days ago, so it's dry, so if anything spills on it, you can wipe it up real quick. So if I don't have one of these handy dandy palette knives, I use the end of my brush, and you can tell by the looks of this that I've done that a lot. Sometimes I'm too excited to paint to go looking for my palette knives, and I just start grabbing my brushes and I mix with the ends of them. All right. So what I'm gonna do is take a combination of white in these two spots. All right, so I'm putting white in these two spots. And what my goal is to take these two light blues and turn them into a toned down light blue. So this light blue, when I put it on the canvas, is gonna appear brighter. The brightest colors are the colors by themselves. So once you start adding other colors to them, they lose that intensity. So what I'm gonna do is take the Ultramarine. I always start with a very, very little bit. I'm gonna take some Ultramarine. I'm gonna take a little bit more. You can mix on your canvas as well once you get used to how colors work. A lot of times artists just know where to dip their brush. Know oh, I need it white, I'm going to add white. Oh, I need blue, I'm going to add blue. And we can just go ahead and mix right on the canvas. All right, so what I've done is made a twin of this. Okay, basically the same color, but now I'm going to change it. Now I'm going to take a little bit of the orange, or I'm going to take the burnt sienna because it's a mixture of orange and blue anyways. All right, and not a lot because this is going to change fast. You're better off adding a little bit more and a little bit more than you are going too far. If you go too far, I always encourage students to get another pile of white and save that color because you never know where you're going to be able to use it. It's probably in your painting somewhere. I think it needs to be a little bit more, and I want it to be stronger, so I'm gonna go ahead with that orange. So now it's almost like a denim blue. So your blue jeans, I like a good. So now you can see these blues, it's very slight, but these blues are different. So I'm going to turn one side. So I'm going to make a puddle here and a puddle here so you can see the extreme difference if I were to add too much. Now it's really browning down. See how it's turned into like a brownish color. I'm going to keep that though, because I'm looking at the bird right now. And I can see that color that I just made right in here. And I can also see it some in there. All right, so I'm going to keep this color. I might use it. I might lighten it. And I can see some variations of those colors there. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing with phthalo. So this plus a little bit of orange, and it's not that big of a difference, but there is a little difference. So I want you to be able to see that. So I'm going to take some phthalo, and you can see this phthalo blue is a lot brighter, right? It's stronger too. This blue will get darker really fast. It's a very, very strong color. It's also a big stainer. If you get it on your clothes, you might want to wear something if you're going to be using this color. If you get it in your clothes, it stains pretty quickly. And learn that really fast that it's a big stainer. All right, so the phthalo is a little bit different. I'm gonna go over here and make something that's not quite as light. You can get some variations of blue to play around with. Now I'm going to tone that color down. I'm going to tone it down with orange. Both blues have the same complement. They both have orange as a complement. Now phthalo sort of leans toward the green a little bit. So when you tone down phthalo blue with orange, the gray that you get isn't quite, the grayish brown isn't quite as purple. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a little bit warmer. All right, so I put a little bit too much there. I'm gonna put a little over here. From there, I'm not going to go get more orange because I just want this to be a tad toned down. And the reason why I want it a tad toned down is so that when I use this bright color, or this bright color, next to this color, it's really going to pop. And that's basically how I do that. So now I'm looking at the bird. All right, I'm going to zoom in. And I'm noticing that these areas are very, very, very bright next to these lighter areas. It's actually brighter on my phone than it is on the computer screen. So I'm going to take a couple of brushes here. Take my palette knife. A trick that I learned back in college with Laura Kenny was if you take a toilet paper roll and you put your paper towel around the roll, I've had this for years. Your paper towels last a lot longer. You won't go through as many. So if you need to wipe it off or do whatever, I just use this. How often do I rinse my brushes? I don't rinse my brush unless my paintbrush is so full of a color, or if I want to go back to a bright color that I need to get the excess paint that's inside of it out of it. I also like to do two brushes. So if I'm going to do a neutral and I'm going to do a bright, I like to keep one neutral and one bright. That way, you know, all my colors don't turn to mud. You want to try to keep them separate. If you have a really bright part of your painting, the other thing to remember is that you have to have a white surface for that color to be bright. If you try to paint a bright color over top of something that's dark or already painted a color, the brightness is not going to pop, okay? It's not going to show through, and there's a little bit of science behind that, and what happens is basically our colors, and I'll show you how bright this is on the canvas, our colors happen because of light traveling through the air. So what happens is if you have white underneath your color, the light travels through the color, bounces back, and makes the color brighter. If you try to do this over top of this or anything else, the light gets absorbed, sort of like, you know, someone that has a black car. If you have a black car, it gets very hot inside because the black absorbs that light. Well, the same thing happens with paint. So if you want an area to be bright, the trick is to make sure that you use, make sure you have white underneath there. So if I wanted a really bright blue dot or something random here, I would paint white, I would let it dry, and then I would put the blue over top of it. So knowing that, sometimes I like to keep, parts of the canvas white before I paint a color over it. And I'm looking at I'm going to use a toned down phthalo here. And I am going to put some images. Switching brushes. Try to stick with one that's really bright. Another trick about using a round brush is when you use the brush, you're gonna need a little bit of water so that the paint is like ink, and barely coming out. What I do is I create a little puddle and I roll it, and this lets me get those really teeny tiny little fine details. So you want to roll that brush. I'm trying to make some of these little I'm gonna get some this is phthalo blue right now. Now I'm gonna get some ultramarine. Oh, I gotta roll it. I didn't roll my brush. So ultramarine and phthalo next to each other help each other out. It'll pop. And the cool thing about what I'm about to paint here is that all these teeny tiny little subtle variations, and I'm trying to get some of these details in. So you can see here, there's a color that's more like a phthalo, or it's more toned down, and these are brighter, and then up here I'm seeing, or this is actually ultramarine or something toned down. So these brighter colors, I'm keeping the phthalo, and then up here I'm doing ultramarine again. So right now I have ultramarine, and the paint's not coming off my brush real good, so that means I gotta give it a little water, a little puddle. All right, so I got a puddle of ultramarine, and I'm rolling my brush to keep the paint at the tip. Another tip about your brushes and maintaining the form of the brush is to store your brushes laying on a napkin. I never store my brushes in the cup of water. I'll rinse it in the cup of water and then I'll lay them down flat. I don't store them sitting. Up here. Now there's some black in behind here, so I'm going to make this black by doing this. I'm going to take this color right here, which is a mixture of burnt sienna, hoping it's still a good, all right. I'm going to add a tiny bit of phthalo to it so you can see how dark this gets. So these are just mixtures of blues and oranges. That's all that's going on here. They're complementary colors. And all right, so now that's nice and dark. I'm going to tuck that up in behind here. Got too much water in my paint, so it's not, I'm going to have to layer that in there. Not quite as dark as I want it. Have to layer that. I also did a video on drawing these birds, so if you want to look for the drawing part of it, I did a little tutorial on that as well. I'm gonna wipe it up. I don't want water right now because I'm gonna go back in and get more paint. And the problem with the paint is that it already had too much water in it. Do some purple and green. See how black that is. I add that in. Might still be too watery. It's looking a little green to me, so I'm gonna grab more purple. Acrylic paint, when you have a lot of water, and it can act almost like a watercolor as well. Zoom back in. Mix some fat. I want to warm it up a little. All right, so you can see that it's starting to get darker and darker and darker as I overlap some of these colors. The other thing that I want to point out is the whites. These whites have a lot of variation in them. So you can see these areas here are a little pinker, or that pretty much almost like that color that I made with the blue and the white and the orange. You can see those colors there. So here it's a little bit more of like, I would say like an ultramarine, and then these yellows are gonna pop, or these whites are gonna pop. I said yellow because I'm gonna probably put a tiny bit of yellow in some of these whites so that they will do that. All right, so just a little bit about how I mix this color. I'm gonna rinse my brush out now, so I'm going into some of the whites. And I don't have any yellow on me. Now the yellow that I'm gonna choose, I think, is going to be a brighter yellow for this. See how much I have in my tube here. This is called cadmium yellow light. So It's a really, really bright yellow. I don't want it to be too orange, yellow, orange, to be really, really bright. All right, so I'm gonna start with some of these variations. See how I do with this camera in my way here. I want that to be a little whiter, so I'm gonna... Acrylic paint dries darker as well, so I'm gonna try to find all these little spots. So I'm looking around and I was using this one, and now I'm gonna grab a little bit of this one, which is still blue. This was your phthalo blue with the orange, and this was your ultramarine. Remember, the ultramarine looks a little more purple. So I wanted to try to vary it up a little. Look at, go over top of the face there. Some variations here. Inside the eye there. Here's by the feet.